Dear friends, welcome to another episode of the Global Defense Report. In this video, we will talk about the 28-point peace plan presented by Trump to Zelensky. A plan that, according to the Ukrainian president, places his country between losing its dignity if it accepts it, or losing US support if it rejects it. But why does Trump want so much to deliver victory in the war to Putin? Donald Trump staying true to his high-pressure negotiation style has, according to Reuters and other newspapers, put a knife to Kyiv's throat with a very clear threat. Either Ukraine signs the new 28-point peace agreement he presented, or the United States shuts off the flow ending arms sales and the supply of intelligence data, which would leave Ukraine without essential systems like the Patriots and in complete darkness on the battlefield. But when we look at the terms of this agreement, what we see is not a peace treaty, but terms of unconditional capitulation. Let's break it down. According to the information, this 28-point text, written in Washington, not in Moscow, which is the ultimate irony, demands that Ukraine cut its army in half. It demands the total handover of the Donbass, including cities that Russian soldiers have not even managed to set foot in yet. It gives Russia the regions it already occupies in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia. It forbids deep strikes against Russian refineries, which have caused significant losses for Putin, and it demands Zelensky's exit from the government within 100 days. In exchange, Trump offers Russia a gradual lifting of sanctions and the country's return to the G8. In territorial terms, Russia's concessions are minimal. With the document asking Putin to withdraw only from small villages he controls in a few parts of Kyiv's outskirts. Basically, Trump is demanding that the victim drop the weapon it uses to defend itself, open the door to its home, and trust that the aggressor, now free from economic pressure, will not return the next night to finish the job. Geopolitically, it hands victory on a silver platter to Vladimir Putin, and here we reach the great mystery, the piece that doesn't fit in this puzzle. Why would Trump do this now and in this way? We are facing a glaring paradox. Recently, the Trump administration announced massive arms sales to Ukraine via NATO, with estimates indicating contracts worth around $100 billion for the next 2 years. In addition, Trump announced the toughest sanctions yet against the Russian oil industry. So if the American military-industrial complex is earning billions and Trump loves presenting positive economic numbers, why force an agreement that essentially makes those weapons useless or unnecessary in the long term? Here we need to get into Donald Trump's mindset and the theories that try to explain what seems so hard to understand. We start with the peacemaker theory, the most rational hypothesis involving political marketing. We are heading toward the 2026 midterms, and Trump's approval rating is fluctuating heavily, with polls showing a considerable decline. And we can't forget that Trump promised in his campaign to end what he calls Biden's war. For his base, the technical details or the future of European security don't matter. What matters is the newspaper headline showing Trump saying he managed to end Biden's war. It is a conceptual repeat of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and Vietnam, both announced as honorable peace, but ultimately serving only the domestic news cycle, with both countries falling into enemy hands as soon as Americans turned their backs. Another hypothesis is the admiration for strongmen. We cannot ignore psychology, and Trump has never hidden his admiration for autocratic leaders. There is a shared worldview, a disdain for classical liberal institutions and NATO bureaucracy. And by forcing Zelensky out, a leader who became a global symbol of democratic resistance, Trump removes someone who overshadows his own protagonism while favoring someone he genuinely admires. Another hypothesis that cannot be dismissed is the commercial factor involving rare earths and energy. Do you remember the rare earth agreement between Trump and Zelensky? Ukraine is rich in lithium and titanium, but the largest reserves are in the east, near the front line or under Russian military occupation. Perhaps Trump is making a pragmatic calculation that Russia will keep those lands anyway. So in his view, if that's how it will be, the best option is to lift sanctions, normalize relations with Moscow, and ensure that American, not Chinese, companies gain access to those resources through post-war partnerships with Russia. It is business above sovereignty, something consistent with what we know about Trump's negotiating personality. And of course, we must touch on the subject no one can prove, but no one dares completely dismiss: the compromat theory, a Russian term referring to threats of damaging public figures by revealing compromising information, which in Trump's case could range from financial or commercial matters to the Epstein files or any other leverage. Moscow could use to push Trump toward favoring the Russian side in the war. It is unsettling to think that the foreign policy of the world's greatest economic, military, and nuclear power could be influenced by personal pressure. But as I said, there is no proof, and as analysts, we must be cautious. Still, when reality defies all strategic logic, the explanation often lies in the unspoken. Now stepping out of Washington and looking toward Europe, if this agreement is forced down Kyiv's throat, we will be witnessing a modern version of Munich 1938. In that year, the powers handed Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland to Hitler in exchange for a promise of peace, leading Churchill to say his famous line, "You were given the choice between war and dishonor. You chose dishonor, and you will have war." If Ukraine is forced to demilitarize and cede territory, Putin will not stop. He will rebuild his forces, use sanction relief to modernize his army, and in 2 or 3 years he will return, and perhaps not only to Ukraine, but to the Baltics, Moldova, or even Poland. After all, with Trump making a point of standing by his side, a NATO without the United States becomes a far more tempting target for Putin's expansionist ambitions. Europe now faces its greatest existential nightmare in 80 years, with Trump closing the American umbrella that has helped protect the continent. If Trump follows through on this threat, the European Union will face a brutal choice. Either shoulder the full burden of Ukraine's defense, which requires a wartime economy. Europe does not yet have or passively watch as a new Russian imperial border advances toward Warsaw, Berlin, and Paris, all with the approval of the United States. What we can conclude today is that Trump's campaign promise to solve the war in 24 hours is turning into a promise to hand victory to the aggressor, in exchange for a photo op and a headline portraying him as the man who brought peace. Trump wants to be the peacemaker. He wants the Nobel Peace Prize, but peace imposed through the victim's surrender is not peace. It is only a short pause before the next conflict. If the United States is abandoning the doctrine of defending democracies invaded by dictatorships in exchange for a quick 28-point agreement and a few headlines, the 21st century has just become far more dangerous for all of us. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any updates.